The only thing all my failures have in common is me.
That sounds bleak as fuck, man.
Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chas Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two endlessly emerging screenwriters try to work out what makes great screenplays work, or in the case of Backmatter, where we all went wrong.
And thank you, Stu, for declaring that this is our annual Backmatter episode. And apologies for, I think we've had two different listeners reach out asking about where Backmatter is, and one listener was specifically asking, where is our Star Wars episode? And because Stu and I actually have a craft insight that we want to explore in Star Wars, it is going to be its own episode, hopefully coming soon. February, March?
Depends. We've actually got backlog of material for 2020, which is weird given that we largely see these episodes as something that can be experienced outside the boundaries of linear space-time. we're mentioning a year. But we're actually going to be comparing The Rise of Skywalker with The Mandalorian, because the way that those two things,
media,
cultural artifacts, treat revelation in relationship to character is different, and it creates different emotional experiences for the audience.
Yeah.
But it is worth saying, because it is Backmatter, and we could be that like, The Mandalorian was more emotionally successful.
Yes.
I don't think you disagree. It's like just as like uncontroversial. We need to find someone out there that is like a diehard, I love The Rise of Skywalker and hate The Mandalorian. So we could just ignore them.
We are hopefully going to bring on a guest who has other insights other than us, because I feel like you and I are a bit too boringly aligned when it comes to the new trilogy.
Yeah, we disagree with what we disagree on is how great The Last Jedi is.
We're just losing listeners by the second. So, given this is a Backmatter episode, what is Backmatter? Some of you newer listeners may question, and it's where Stu and I allow ourselves to break free of our format, and rather than do empirical research, we just talk about how we feel about shit. We allow ourselves to offer a more subjective opinion. I was going to say offer an opinion, but everything on this show is our opinion.
And let's not pretend that it's like, as much as we use empirical evidence, it's still through the subjective lens.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
what it means is we're not referencing other people's work. And I know we did an episode where we actually analysed our own scripts, and we realised how poor a writer you were. And I'm being facetious, obviously. We analysed our own scripts. But this is different, I guess. We kind of speak a little bit more about who we are as writers, and more a little bit our own process. So if it doesn't sound like it's your bag, well, you've already downloaded the episode, so we get the stats anyway. So feel free just to stop and wait until the Star Wars episode. Otherwise, welcome.
I mean, with our last Backmatter episode, we talked about forgiving yourself for not writing, and that seemed to resonate with a lot of listeners. So,
and weirdly, I mean, that was back in April. That my year just got fucking worse. So
it did for us both.
Yeah.
So anyway, here's the topics, the proposed agenda for this episode. Discussing what is in your control in relation to your writing and your career, using the blacklist site, the value of treatments. And
I guess specifically because I'm now convincing you to come to my world of extended scene breakdowns.
You're making me come to your world, whether you are bringing me into it. It's like I'm being colonized.
Oh, yeah. You don't have a choice. Sorry that we got producers wanting to read something off a pitch. Oh,
which makes me say, let's write a script rather than this weird halfway house. But anyway, that should be an interesting topic.
Guess who's some of us knew how to play with others.
I'm happy playing with myself.
Yes, that's what your wife said too.
And the final topic is writing for yourself versus working for hire, because both you and I
have done both.
Yeah, but only in the last year or so.
We did like 100,000 words on a video game in like 2017.
Oh shit. Yeah, okay.
And then we did the rewrite in 2018, and I was pitching on projects which wasn't quite the same, but it's like I'm not going to name names, but it was like, here's some concept art, and a rough kind of like thematic territory. Can we hear some ideas? It was the weirdest, like good good writing experience. That never went ahead. And then there was another rewrite that didn't go ahead, but it was rewriting a script where the actual original screenwriter had passed away and the director wanted to do another pass. But then the original screenwriter's estate owned the rights and said no, they didn't. They were just happy for the project to
die rather than be rewritten. Can kind of understand that. Anyway, okay. So let's start with what is in your control and what do I mean by that? You and I were talking about, as you do around New Year's, around this time, we were talking about the end of the decade, the end of the year, and what we wanted the new year to bring. And I just realized that I've got so many projects that I'm wanting to push that, like, my main incentive at the moment is not generating new material to try and generate new opportunities, because I feel like the material is there, it's good enough, I'm getting good feedback. It's about how do I now convert that into a career or payment. But the problem is that all those projects are now been handed over to other people, and it's putting my career or my fate or what I want from this year into other people's hands. Like, I'm giving the decision, I'm giving over my destiny to other people's hands. And so that's a completely unhealthy mental thing to do. So I should then refocus what my objectives are for this year around things that I want to do for myself. I mean, one of the best pieces of advice, Eric Heiser, he says, I mean, obviously Oscar-nominated, amazing screenwriter of Arrival, but he every year writes something for himself, regardless of everything else he has on. Write something on spec. Like, one of the things that you and I are talking about is taking one of the projects that is out to market that we're trying to push and actually doing an audio version of it that you podcast listeners will probably hear of when if we do it. And that's taking something into our own control, putting that in the...
Sort of like seizing the means of production, Chas.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a phrase that I really like, which is stress is feeling responsible for things you cannot control. And it's a very helpful, particularly in a work environment, because it's like, if I'm feeling stressed about something, then I either need to take control over it or I need to shed responsibility. And it's obviously in this career path, let's broaden it out, like vocation that we have chosen. And it's choosing on some level. Even if you feel compelled to do it, you can be hideously unhappy and do something else instead of being hideously unhappy and doing this.
Like a lawyer or a freelance editor?
The problem with, it's not a problem, but the thing with me in editing is it's probably like 60 or 70% satisfying. I find it more satisfying than when I was being like VFX producing, but that's a problem because it means I don't have the anger and
the drive
of just like, fuck you, I need to completely change my life. It's like, yeah, this is not bad. So it's really, it is an interesting thing. So it's like, am I feeling stressed because I can't control? And what do we mean by control? Obviously, we can go and shoot projects, and we can, but then you got to do money, got to raise money and all that.
I mean, shooting is so expensive. Like, I know the means of production have come down, and you can go out and shoot something on your iPhone. I've done all that. I've made 10 short films, and that is no longer where I want to invest my time and resources.
Most of the last decade was taken up working on restoration. It's beyond there's beyond a financial cost in doing stuff that is independent.
And so you and I, that was the beer, the sours that we're drinking.
Yeah, that seems appropriate. We're drinking sours on this episode.
So you and I, the reason why we're talking about audio production of these things is that it brings the cost of production way down, and you have an end deliverable, a finished product that people can consume.
The product becomes the product rather than an in-between. But I think there's other ways that you can be more optimistic in terms of taking creative destiny, right? And I'm going to be optimistic because I have been thinking about this, right? So I'm going to specifically write projects that are within the means of me to make as a director, or I'm specifically going to write, which is a project we're working on, where Chas and I are writing a horror film at the moment that is specifically configured to be marketable, as in putting in the brains of how do we produce this, go and pitch it to producers. I've gone to film markets and actually pitched it. That is stuff that's in your control. Ultimately, I cannot, unless I'm actually the person putting the money in and hiring the director or directing it myself or any of that stuff, that is out of the control. But we can actually take a lot more of take a lot more of the reins if it's something that you feel capable of doing. And it's obviously something that I can do and I am comfortable doing, but that's also because I've forced myself to do it. I have gone to 37 South, which is the largest film market in the Southern Hemisphere, 3 times now. First time I was nervous as fuck. By the third time, I knew what I was there to do and how to pitch the projects. The only way you learn how to do that stuff is by doing it, right? So sometimes you're just going to be like, I'm going to do it. But I've also got a very specific attitude, and it probably comes from being in Australia. I think to be very, as in we're kind of this weird Euro-American system, like our government, right? Like largely that we're independent, slightly government subsidized, but film markets are really important, which is going to be different, I imagine, if you're an American writer trying to sell specs to Hollywood.
Yeah.
But I think that principle of you can go and find people, you can test ideas in the furnace of pitching, right? And there is nothing like sitting opposite a producer, seeing what they're reacting to and not, that can determine it. And you realize, I think also, for me, what I've realized is that every project is different in terms of how you pitch it.
Yeah. But there are some ideas that I feel like do defy the pitch process. I think the pitch process is really ideal for genre or high concept. And not to say you can't pitch a drama, but you're working on a piece that I'm super excited to read, but it's one of those things that you almost need to have the finished product in front of you so that you can understand what is that's so amazing about it.
Yet, in a pitch, I got a lot of people wanting to read it. But I pitched the concept, not the story. So that's one thing I've made the decision to do, and it's obviously over the number of years that I've decided to go to film markets and pitch projects, even at pre-scripted stages, right?
Which then puts the pressure on us to write it, but, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's not just us. I pitched 2 projects without scripts that people want to read, right? But it's a good way to go, okay, they're not so interested in that. You know, and it's not like a huge thing, but I've got a little bit of a track record now. So it feels like I'm confident pitching people projects and our ability to deliver. The question is the time frame when it's not a full-time job. That's always
and in Australia, I mean, it's from what I hear, it's rare in the States, but in Australia, it's non-existent to purchase off the pitch. So it's not like you're pitching to get paid to write this thing. You're pitching to gauge, should I write this thing?
Yeah, and that's important because obviously what the decision is that we're going to be writing stuff unpaid to us for a certain extent. And look, there may be a project that we run spec that a producer really loves, but all they're going to pay us is like $1,000 option. And that is the economic reality of being a feature film writer in Australia, right? And maybe the only way to go to get money is if they apply for development funding, which is, again, something that you can't control.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate thing. It feels like it needs to be its own category, but we don't have much to say. I've only been successful with development money once.
In December 2019, I got a kick in the balls where I had a project. It's a biopic with an established Australian producer, and she was super confident with this project. And the feedback came back. I don't know how, like, I'm relating the second hand, so I don't know how triggering I should be. But the first piece of feedback is we're not really funding features unless they are mind-blowingly great. And I actually agree with that. I feel like that's a good investment of taxpayer dollars, because in Australia we are spending taxpayer dollars. And
Screen Australia, people at Screen Australia listen to us, by the way, Chas.
Good.
Just in case you want to be...
Right, look, I'm just relaying what I heard. And look, it's an issue that they're only funding features if they're amazing, but then what's the bar? And this will relate to a topic that we'll talk about later, is because it was offered treatment, and I hate treatment as selling tools.
Well, yes, it's hard settlement tools. We're not established. Ultimately, the decision-making process is a black box that we don't have access to, right? It's something that is completely out of our control. When you get to a certain stage in your career, I guess, and have enough career capital that you can go and soft pitch to people and go, hey, we're thinking of doing this thing. What does, do you have any strategy advice? Which in the context of the Australian system is how you would need to do it. Go and speak to someone in a film funding body. They can't give creative feedback, but they can tell you strategy. That sounds like a great project, but you need this kind of producer, or you might need this market attachment. Yeah. That's really good. And that is actually stuff that is in your control that you can pursue. Yeah. I obviously can't speak as much for the American system, but I imagine that opportunity, let's soft pitch ideas is a similar kind of thing, right? Because it's also, we've talked about it before, the time cost of projects, developing things that people don't want to make.
There's that amazing, we'll link to it in the show notes, but that amazing blog by Terry Rossio.
Time cost. So the other thing, which is tangentially related, but I went to the Austin Film Festival in 2019.
I'm so fucking jealous. Are you going to go again this year?
We are going to go and do a Draft Zero panel.
Yes, we are.
Aren't we?
I have Anna's blessing. She's going to Japan next month, and I've said, so if you're going to Japan, could I go to Austin?
Austin was cheap. LA was not.
So says our poor intern whose couch you crashed on.
Yes. Anyway, cost of living. Point was, when I went to LA, I had a very specific criteria of projects I wanted to move forward. And this is me. Look, one of them I will be a quote-unquote producer on because it's an option of a short story, and the option through the lawyer will come on me, and I am effectively producing and attaching another writer to work with me on it, etc., etc. But I had a meeting with the senior partner at UTA about this, not in terms of my project, but to help up an element of the project forward. But I made sure that I was in LA for a very short amount of time to be like, so the conversation is, hey, I'm over here for this. I leave on this date, try and have a meeting about this and have it. And I had all the meetings that I wanted to have. And I'm pushing those projects forward without wanting or asking permission from other people or expecting it. Now, I probably wouldn't have done that, been in a position to do that 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
But you just learn by doing. If you know what I mean? Like, ultimately, you have to knock on those doors. But I don't think, for me, the goal has never been to, and I've said this before on the show, the goal for me is not to get an agent or a manager. That's a byproduct of trying to make films.
Yeah, the goal is to make films, right? And I believe we pre-discussed some of this material, but you're getting to the point that we're in an industry where it's very hard to have one person driving something, to maintain your destiny fully, to not involve other people and need yeses, to compromise essentially, but also to put your fate in other people's hands to an extent. But I mean, my goals, they are to make films. That's why I want to do this. But my intermediate goals are to be paid to write, because I'm sick of writing for free. But that, I think, is a very poor thing to have as a goal, because it inherently puts it in other people's hands.
Yeah, because they have to choose to pay you.
Exactly. Right. So instead of saying I need to only be paid to write, I need to find other ways, other goals that are in my control.
Interestingly. Well, no, because of what it might, if you only write when you get paid, that's the possibility that you won't write for a whole year.
Exactly.
Right, and that might be the acceptable trade-off for that balance.
Well, I do write for myself. I certainly don't write for others for free anymore. Although I worked on the snip for, it was a 12-page short that had an almost 18-month development period for free, and that ended up getting made. And we'll be interviewing, you edited it, Stu, but we'll be interviewing director, producer Ben, hopefully as a standalone episode soon, about that development process. And that was totally worth working for free because I knew he was going to make the project.
Yes. Sorry, I'm going to come back to the LA thing to give a very specific, because it's like, oh, well, how do I get in contact with those people? And it's like, oh, that just takes time. But my hint about networking, if I have to give anyone, because this is again a way, it's control. And look, being in Austin was like, oh yeah, Americans are a lot more bullish about just going like, hi. But in the Australian context, and possibly still works in America, introduce someone else to someone else. Most people at these events don't know anyone else. So going, if you're there with someone, oh, hey, this is my mate Chas, he's written these projects, he was an Austin Film Festival semi-finalist or whatever, like praise someone else. And then talk to them, and it puts the emphasis off you. But if you help people make connections, they will help you make connections. And that's how you build these things. Pretty much everyone I had meetings with in LA, it's not like I was having like 3 meetings a day, but it was all because I had the balls to ask people for content. Hey Chas, can you give me the email for this person or that person or whatever? But that is something that you can also put in your control. I know a lot of people are socially anxious, and that's understandable. But you don't have to, like, your career does not depend on you having a miraculous meeting in that. It can be, hey, I've met a person that's met another person, And that should be a valuable connection in and of itself, because it's cool supporting other people and checking out their work and following each other. That is something that's in your control.
Okay, so why has this topic come up for me? It's because I feel like I've shifted. We're still endlessly emerging, but I've shifted to a different phase of emerging. Previously, I was someone who didn't know how to write. So what was in my control? Learn how to write. Then I was getting better at writing. What could I then do? I need to make these connections, build these networks, expose myself. And there was a variety of ways I could do that. Entered my scripts into competitions, went to conferences like the Austin Film Festival, go to networking events. Those were all things in my control. So now I've built up a network and I've got projects that people are excited about and think are good and are pushing them. And then it's like, so what's next for me? What should I be doing now?
Yeah, so what do you say no to? And what do you say yes to?
Yeah, and what do I push myself towards? So I've got a slate and I'm having to be a bit picky about it. So what am I choosing? I want to choose the audio version, but it could be, for our listeners, it could be the short film, like make something, have an end product that isn't a script. So that's one thing that I'm driving towards that's in my control. The other thing is that the projects that I'm choosing are, like you've said, I've screened for my own internal sense check as to, is this something that's got a good chance of going somewhere? Because I've written enough and had enough yeses and nos to kind of test from all my ideas which one I think is the most likely. But I'm also a big advocate of writing what you love. I feel like the other project that we were talking about that you say you've pitched the concept of and got interest in, you aren't drawn to that idea, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because you went, oh, this is going to be the most commercial slam dunk success. You're drawn to the material. And I still think that's a good way to go, because passion is what inspires and interests people.
I think the thing is, ultimately these things should be a multiplier, right? As in, you've got like one column. I'm borrowing from this other thing to do with like software development of like idea times execution, which is you rate your idea out of 10 and then your execution's out of 10 and you multiply it, and that's actually the value of the project, right? Because you have an idea that is 10 out of 10, but the execution is 1 out of 10 and the idea is only worth 10. Right, which is true, because there's so many other, like, you sit there and go, oh, these great ideas, you know, like Twitter wasn't really the first to market. It was a very specific execution of something we had kind of seen before. Right, Facebook was not the first thing to market. Apple Watch, not first to market. Right, so in the context of the film, writing stuff, there's obviously, here's how passionate I am about something, but then multiplied by, for me, it's my understanding of how it fits in, or how I can see it being put together as a project. And that's what I mean by like put together, by like assembling the pieces. And because this is not a project that I'm interested in directing, it's easy to be more rational about that, right? Because a little bit more disinterested. So but it also then becomes its own motivation, because you sit there and go, man, a smart producer should know how to put this together. It's the right budget level, good cast, opportunities, minimal. I know how to have those conversations. Yeah. And those conversations come from experience, both making stuff, working on other people's stuff, and trying to pitch projects. Whereas there's other things that you're like, this is a good idea, but you know that putting it together is going to be more challenging. That can be demotivating, because you're like, this is a great idea, but how are we going to pull this together?
And let's be clear, you and I are talking about this problem because I feel like we've both moved past what I feel was an earlier writing problem where I didn't know if I would be able to finish a project or not. And I certainly hear that from a lot of other writers. So now I know that I'm fairly confident that if I start a project, I can finish it. Like, that's not going to be a problem. And now I'm even more confident that if I choose the right project and I've done the right steps, I can execute it to a certain level of competence. And I use the word competence, not excellence. So those are not the concerns. Now the concern is, for me, is how do I convince other people how do I choose a project that I will invest this time in that will get other people excited about it? And that's what you're talking about in terms of pitching it early.
Yeah. And I'm lucky enough, I have a network of producers and stuff that I can be like, so I'm working this thing and this is what it's kind of about and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds really cool. Send it to me when you're ready. It's like, okay, that one's got to... There's others where they're like, meh. They'll be polite about it, but you've got to learn that, okay, call. Because it's, in a way, ultimately, it's this. There are so many films, so many TV shows that get made every year, and most people don't even see 1% of that. So unless this is an event movie like Rise of the Skywalker, the Rise of the whatever the fuck it is, you know, how do you decide to see Parasite? And there can be like, well, okay, you know, that's got like social capital, as in like it's a thing that people tell you need to see because it's won awards. And it's like, well, that's what happens with other writers that win awards, is that ultimately producers are interested in working with them because it's from the writer of this previous success, or it's won this thing, that thing. Otherwise, you are going to be like, oh yeah, okay, that sounds interesting. It's a one-take World War I film, which is, you know, 1917, and it's got this particular thing that it sounds like it's about like focusing on the young boys and all that stuff. That's a way of pitching that project. It's a conceptual way, not I'm going to tell you the narrative, right? So I think that's something that you can pay, and I try to pay attention to, right? And it will change. I pitched The Witch to I won't even say it's a friend, it's just like an internet person who's really into like part of the metal community, looking for like horror films to watch. And I'm like, you should watch The Witch, because it's basically northeastern black metal, which is a very specific type of US BM that deals with like folk themes, and like The Witch is that. And hopefully they'll watch it, but that's kind of how you would pitch it for them, where someone else is going to be pitching The Witch differently. But that is a factor, I guess, when you've got limited time, you know. How do you choose where to spend your time?
I really like that earlier you made the connection between stress and control, because this year, one of the things that really helped me manage 2019 was reading an article. I might have even read it in 2018, but it was an interview that M. Night Shyamalan did in relation to Glass. And he said that I was putting out these films that I loved making, and they were getting great success, and I conflated the success of the movies with accolades for myself. I'm paraphrasing here. I'll put a link to the interview in the show notes. But in the end, when he stopped, he kept on making movies, but he wasn't getting the accolades and wasn't getting the success for them. He was conflating that into what that was meaning about himself. And what he realized is he was putting what he thought was in his control was accolades. He thought getting praise from people from his work was within his control, because previously he had made movies and would get the accolades. And he was spiraling and struggling because he was putting something that was not actually in his control mentally in the column of in his control. And as soon as he's like, you know what got me that success, what got me those accolades was just making things that I loved. So what's in my control is to make things that I love. Yeah.
Resonated.
Yeah.
All right. There's a quote. I found it in my diary and I stole it from someone else.
It's a quote from Stu?
No, it's not quite. No, it's actually stolen from someone else, but it was in a journal entry from like 2016, which shows you how much this shit just eats away with you. But it's interesting because it's both can be seen positively and negatively, which is the only thing all my failures have in common is me.
It sounds bleak as fuck, man.
Like, it's pretty bleak. On the other hand, it's like that is something that there is an element to that I control, can influence, I guess control's got a certain negative connotation to it, because we can't control everything.
But as soon as you accept responsibility for something, you have power over it.
Or maybe you don't, you accept responsibility, you don't have power over it, which I guess is maybe the difficulty of parenting.
But then how can you have responsibility over it?
Ask Scott Morrison about the bushfires. Look, I don't want to get more philosophical into this because I've got a different worldview from you. You know, the cold indifference of the universe, fundamentally.
So, all right, what is in our control? Okay. We've come to pitching. I feel like we can segue here quite easily into treatments, because you've pitched 2 projects without having a script. Okay.
What I want to come to that I think are outcomes, coming back to that 2-column idea. How much you've got control over your idea, but you also have a control, because it's also about where you spend your time, and sometimes just working on the thing that you're super passionate about, but won't fare well in the market. And I'm using market in a very broad sense. It's something you also have control in. So for me, part of what you have control in is choosing to develop projects that have potential, right? If your idea of how this film is going to get made relies on it being the most amazing thing ever, that is actually not in your control. Because as when we eventually talk about blacklist script reads, you can't control other people's reaction to it. You can there's a base level of competency, but ultimately a lot of this stuff is super subjective. But what you can control is who you send it to. If you take outside the blacklist, when we get to that, but that's part of the problem with blacklist use, you have no control over who reads it. Who do you send it to, how you pitch it to them, how you frame it to them, and whether they're interested in the first place. And there are things that you can become more aware of when you're specifically choosing which of your projects to develop. The other thing that I have found that is important to me is that I trust that I have a continuous stream of ideas, right? There's occasional times, like I'm thinking about banging my head at the moment for the last couple of days, when I'm trying to come up with an alternate project for a development round in Film Victoria. I'm like, surely there's something else. And I'm banging my head, but there's little sparks that are going off my head and I'm jotting things down. But it's hilarious because, like, Matt and I, because he's my most regular collaborator, we probably have close to 10 projects. Like, some of them are literally a sentence. You know, like, oh yeah, this would be cool. And you know it's cool, but we haven't found the right time to develop it. And then they'll spit and churn in different ways. But for us, we trust that if we pitch people ideas and they say no and they don't like it, that we'll find something else. Because a career is not just a script. It's multiple scripts. And it's the ability to constantly develop stuff. But part of that is that broader idea of continually feeding, for me, like replenishing the well, you know, and looking outside of, you know, the biggest, closest that we'll ever get to film reviewing here. Stu's problem with a lot of modern movies is all they know is modern movies. And if all your diet is food and or if all your diet is movies, then all you can talk about, have anything to say about is other movies. Yeah. Which, when we get to it, is part of the problem with, like, I think with J.J. Abrams. Ooh. Look, I just think it's self-referential in a way that ultimately can collapse, which is as close as we'll get to talk to Star Wars. Whatever the flaws of George Lucas, particularly with, like, the prequels and stuff, fuck, he had a lot to say, and it wasn't about other movies as much as he used iconography of other films.
Well, I think the original trilogy, yes, but the prequels, none of that.
What?
He's not based on the traditional narratives and Seven Samurai and all that kind of stuff.
Immaculate Conception? Right? Like, he's just borrowing from different, like, this was fucking
traditions.
noir.
Yeah.
Attack of the Clones has got noir in it. Like,
it's got a fucking dino.
Yeah, exactly. He's still using iconography, but it's about stuff that's not other. Yeah. He's just using movies as a way to allow people to access underneath. Yeah. Anyway, that in that rant, but you also have control of the diet. But I guess it's that idea of you've got control of what you spend your time on. And sometimes spending time on a project, a lot of time, and we've all done it, that may not be able to find a home, you know.
And maybe it can't find a home yet.
Well, when we get to talk to the blacklist, 10 years later,
Yeah. Well, okay, so do we segue into treatments or do we segue into the blacklist?
Probably the blacklist.
Yeah. So in your control, one of the ways you've written this amazing project of trying to get access or exposure if you don't have a network yourself to send things to is to chuck a project up on the blacklist site.
It's very telling use of language. Chuck it on the blacklist site. It actually sounds not very structured. I'll just put it up there and magic will happen.
Sure. I feel it would be fair to say that I have a lot more experience with the blacklist site, but a lot less success.
My success was low.
Although a lot of my network comes from a biopic that I put up on the blacklist. That project did very well.
Best thing you've ever written.
Well, thank you. Best thing I ever written.
Until the next thing that you wrote that's better.
But it tapped into the right time and space, and it was a confluence of things, and it got me a lot of contacts. And the blacklist was very helpful for that.
Which is interesting, actually.
So I'm a big proponent of the blacklist as a way of people who are outside LA or outside of film industry with zero network as a way of gaining exposure for a good project. I'm not going to fucking give a summary of what the blacklist site is, but there are some quirks as to how it works. So it has an algorithm that that dictates whether something gets onto mail outs that goes to its industry members. And I only know this from secondhand information, so please, Franklin Leonard, if I'm saying anything that's incorrect here, please do correct me. And I've been on those sites because you know that when you get on the mail out, you suddenly get a massive uptick in downloads. And you can get industry readers ranking projects, and you can pay blacklist readers to rank projects. So if you've got a brand new project, you can pay to get those few reads. And if you get a high enough score, pretty much anything from an 8 up will get you read, will get you exposure. Now, I've had industry readers give projects of mine a 1 score, and that has tanked my
industry, not the blacklist.
Not the blacklist readers, industry readers. So someone has read a project of mine that had been doing really well and subjectively hated it so much that they gave it such a low score that it tanked, and I've then basically taken that project off the site because there's no point in leaving it on there because it's a monthly hosting fee. And the reads are quite expensive. They're $75 at the moment. Anyway, you buy 3 reads, that's a big investment in a month or 2 of hosting. But to my mind, that's actually a better investment of money than however many competition entry fees I've paid over the years. But you only want to do it when I think a project you've gotten enough great feedback from your circle of writers, from anyone you can send it to, you know that something's really good. There's no point in spending all that money just to get notes.
Yeah.
Because what you want is industry looking for that project. Because other things that I really like about the blacklist is you can put a whole lot of metadata in there. You can say it's a fucking sci-fi murder mystery that's under $3 million to produce, that's got a strong female lead, and you can put in so much tagging that people can get a lot of interest in it. So that's the good things about the site. Now, one of the projects that you and I are working on together that hopefully we will produce an audio version of in the near to mid-distant future.
Sometime this decade.
And then, dear listeners, you will definitely hear about it. It had been optioned and it fell out of option. So, I mean, when we get to career updates, the last time we did a career update was actually 2 years ago, and we didn't do one last year because we were so depressed about where our careers were at. And one of the reasons was this project was not doing well, but it fell out of option. And because it fell out of option, I said, fuck it, I will chuck it up on a whole lot of competitions because I've got it again just to see what happens to it. And it reached second round of Austin, semi-final of Page Awards, semi-final of Script Pipeline, and got down to the final 20 scripts of the Roadmap Writers Competition.
Top 10 for John Hind.
Yeah.
The Australian Writers Guild John Hind.
So when you get to top 10 of John Hind, when you get to top 20 of a competition, and it doesn't matter the competition, I'm not saying Roadmap Writers, I'm not passing any comment on that, but it got through however many readers and gatekeepers of what I presume is thousands of scripts to get to the top 20. So the one thing that I take from that for myself is that this project is not a steaming pile of shit. Then I put that project up on the blacklist, and I got...
Turns out it is.
I got 3 readers.
Total steamer.
I think I got 2 6s and a 5. And out of 10, it is just not worth leaving.
Not worth paying the money to continue hosting it.
Yeah, just not worth it. One of the things that really pissed me off is all 3 of those readers said that the budget was high. When you and I wrote it with a producer attached... Well, sorry, I wrote it, but it was in development with you attached as a director and another producer to a budget of 1.5 million Australian dollars.
Yeah, it would have been tight, but it was eminently doable, right?
But we rewrote set pieces and design ideas to a budget.
Going to production designers it was getting properly budgeted, right? It wasn't so far as we had a first AD schedule it, but it was definitely we were thinking how we can make it. And you sit there and go, what does someone who's never... I don't know who these readers... That's the thing. You don't know what these readers are. Maybe they were right. Maybe they they're up-and-coming line producers.
Well, I reached out to I complained. I'm not usually one to complain, but this one, because I've loved the service for so long, to get really battered like this, I've felt really shitty about it. I wrote to them and they said, all our readers have 1 year experience in the industry, which is a bigger cutoff than a lot of other gatekeeping services.
Doesn't mean they know how much fucking shit costs.
No. And that's the thing. You read that particular project thinking it's high budget, you're going to be disappointed. you read that script thinking, oh, this is low budget, or this is really exciting.
Yeah, look, I get why they look at it and go, this seems expensive based on what they know. But if you are a forward-thinking independent filmmaker, it's not a boast, right? So, because for those who don't know, I also lecture very part-time, one lecture a week in like motion design and advanced post-production, right? And I was, for the last year, I've been teaching it for like a year, pushing my students away from green screen, right? Going, projectors are getting better, televisions are getting better. Like, don't assume that green screen is the way to do it, because that's what you see on all the big budget films, right? And I would show them examples of how, like in Solo, the Star Wars film, they were using projection in the Millennium Falcon cockpit, and from Oblivion. But I'm like, this is, 24, we're doing this for car stuff, right? Because I've seen students shoot green screen in a car and not know what they're doing, and then they're stuck doing green screen in a fucking moving vehicle, and it looks terrible, right? It's like, just get a television and shoot some shit. And then The Mandalorian comes out, and what does The Mandalorian do?
The volume?
No, you probably don't know this. There's not behind the scenes videos, but you can see the tech demos called Stagecraft, where effectively they're using a video game engine to render the background in real time and project it, and then they move the camera, which is on a rig, that is then used as the camera that projects through Unreal Tournament. So the backgrounds are being rendered in real time using a game engine, using Unreal Tournament 4. And then that's connected to the light rig. It's an expensive way to do it when you're Disney, but there is a way that, say, if you're doing an outside space scene where you're like, this doesn't have to be green screen. What we do is we shoot it against black. And then we stick a few lights up and we kind of get there, right? But you've got to have, or we're going to use projection for this, or we're going to do that, or, understanding how films get made on lower budgets, right? And being innovative. I don't expect anyone with 1 year's experience. And the thing is, you're going to sit there, and this comes to the targeting the audience, and one of the problems with the blacklist is that you have no control of who reads your shit. So when you send this project to a producer, of course they're going to query it and goes, holy crap, there's like zero gravity space stuff. How are you going to deal with that? You can give them an answer. How are you going to do the wire work? Well, actually, what we've decided to do with the production design, you can see the sketches, is that we're building the mount points in the set, and we're going to use that for the rigging, and that saves doing this, this, and this. And we're going to do it in terms of the costumes, because one of the problems with wire work is that the way it pulls the clothes, and that's what you have to paint out, and that's where the expense comes from. But if you plan it, you can do it more cost effectively. You can have those conversations. But when you've got a reader and you've got no control over who the reader is, then you are literally pulling the handle.
And they might go, space. Multiple spacecraft. That's expensive.
Yeah,
high budget.
As opposed to we can go to Turbo Squid and spend, X amount on buying an asset, or we're going to do it as a model, which actually is cost expensive. Like, it's time expensive doing model work, right? But that is the difficulty. I mean, I'm using that as a specific example, but that idea that people seemingly, we have no way of qualifying or quantifying their experience of making judgments on the expense of your project. For me, it's a very frustrating thing, right?
And look, that was one thing that I had. Three readers gave me 5 and 6.
Extrapolate that as a specific, I'm using that as a specific example, but you can extrapolate that to other areas. Of they've got 1 year's experience, and it's like, mate, I wouldn't I'm thinking about me with 1 year's experience. Super arrogant, knows doesn't know what they don't know. Oh, I read Robert McKee, and Robert McKee says,
I'm not suggesting they fix this system. There's no cost-effective way of doing it.
No.
Right? So it is what it is. But what I think it frustrated me, talking about stress, talking about what's in your control, is suddenly I felt that something that was in my control, if I write something really good and put it on the blacklist, it will do well. Suddenly I'm like, I could write something really good and put it on the blacklist, and it's now rolling a dice. Do I get a reader that connects with this material or not? So let's handball to your experience of the...
Right. So I've only used the blacklist once, because there is a competition that they call, it's not even a competition, they call it an opportunity for specific reasons, put together by Verhoeven's Pictures. And my experience has obviously been very positive, where they partnered with a blacklist, looking specifically for Australian writers. You tagged into the system. Every script that got opted in was considered, but they basically weighted it towards scripts that had been reviewed
By their readers.
by the blacklist readers positively. And I paid for one read because that's all I wanted to do, right? I literally uploaded this on the last day it was going on. We got an 8 out of 10 review, really positive, someone who really connected with what myself and Matthew thought were the strengths. The criticisms were like, these are the most fair criticisms that we've read. Like, it's not someone wanting to be the project to be different. They were just helping us trying to enhance what it was. And then we made the Aussie list. So this is like the 10 scripts that they've chosen to be considered for Warner Brothers. But the scripts aren't considered by Warner Brothers to be produced.
The writers.
The writers. So the opportunity, which is amazing, is that Warner Brothers hire you to write something. Considered hire you. They're under no obligation, which is fair enough.
Whatever. You and Matt, on the basis of that one thing, have
And that
been
one review.
published
Yeah.
being
On the Aussie list.
on the Aussie list. Which is
amazing.
incredible.
Because of that 8 out of 10, we got 2 other reads
For free.
for free
From the blacklist.
from the blacklist. They finally came in after all that came out. We waited until it all got announced because I was like, let's spin the handle. That's what it felt like, pulling the handle on a poker machine. First review came back as a 5, right? And the criticism, I read it, and fundamentally they had a problem understanding the stakes because the setup for payload, which if you've heard of the previous episode, Earth is being evacuated, blah, 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 blah. There's a super volcanic eruption going on. And there is literally a shot from space with the continental United States being covered in a fucking ash cloud, right? You know, it's pretty monumental. There are ships leaving. Clearly the film is saying, this is bad, everyone's leaving. And it was like, man, we really need to kind of more clearly understand the stakes and why that people need to leave. And it's like, okay, the only way we can address this known is if we have a scientist sit there and explain why a supervolcanic eruption is bad, despite all the imagery. And like that volcanic eruption is one moment, but there is definitely moments where we see it's bad. Like the film is set in Australia and the cloud from the United Continental in the United States comes to Australia, right? And everyone talks about how bad it is. It's like, you're going to have to sit there and explain it.
And this was before ash from Australian bushfires was reaching New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly, right? And like part of me is like, look, if the film was a big enough budget, you're probably going to have to do that because they're going to be people that are like, I don't get it. Because, you know, our ability.
But because of that note, you got a 5.
Yeah.
Like that's one.
They
fucking
had
note.
other criticisms of other things, but that was the one that stood out to me, that it's like, because I think writing is more integrated than people. Like people separate it, but if you don't understand why characters are motivated, the dialogue isn't going to feel good.
Yeah.
Because you don't understand why they're talking.
Yeah.
Or you don't understand why people are behaving in a particular way.
Yeah.
The next read we got was a 6. And their biggest issue with the project was essentially they called it like grubby and ultraviolet. and then there was they found craft issues, but I'm like, it sounds like your biggest issue because you keep on referencing the ultraviolence and the grubbiness. And there was one thing of like, I don't understand a world in which human trafficking is just like happens like under like so overt. And it's like, clearly you don't know much about the fucking world if you're surprised about like the amount of human trafficking that goes on in the universe, in the world, right? Particularly during wartime. Like go and read up in the shit that was happening in like Bosnia and Serbia.
Fuck.
It's
like, still happening in the UK. I went in, this is 15 years ago now, there was a museum in Edinburgh to the human trafficking that's happening in the UK, just showing all the times they've found human slaves, mostly from Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in Australia. There is an incredible amount of human trafficking from Southeast Asia into Australia. Like, but in heightened state, it was just, the point was that obviously this person, I don't have a problem with them not liking it. Okay, cool. You've got a clear problem with the quote unquote ultraviolence. The script, like less people die in this than in a Marvel film, right? It's just that we don't hide from the brutality of the violence. Yeah. I want Fuqua to direct this. Like that would be my dream because he's got that unflinching, like if you're going to show someone get like cracked in the head, show them get cracked in the head. We should understand that that is awful. Yeah. Not like bloodless.
But the point is, these were low scores that impacted our project. It didn't like...
For us, if we got it the other way around, right, we would never have made the Aussie list.
Right.
So it comes down to luck. And coming back to the controls, I have no control over the reader or like, do they look at the tags? Do they sit there and go, this doesn't sound like it's for me? And it might be like, well, they shouldn't, you know, but when you're pitching projects, you can shoes. Because look, the payload script, we got like, not close, but we were working with producers that were really excited. It was just that I agree with the budget comments. It's like a $20 million science fiction film. Like it's in a budget level that doesn't really exist anymore. But for the right people, it was a super exciting project. And the problem with doing something like The Blacklist is it doesn't feel like you can match with someone appropriately.
Or that those people are claiming to be objective in giving like scores for dialogue, plot, world, whatever, allocating a budget, but clearly it can't be objective. That ultimately it is subjective. Did you like it or did you not? You're going to give it an 8 or a 5 if you liked it or if you didn't. Yeah. Regardless of all those fucking numbers and that formula and whatever experience you have.
Coming back to my lecturing things, that's what happens.
Yeah.
I look at an animated sequence and go, oh, I like that. That's cool. That feels like an 8. And then you sit there and go and work out the numbers to give it the mark that you want. Right. So I'm not trying to slight their service. I think the constructive feedback would just be interesting to know how the tags are used to assign readers.
Well, I think it's not, but that's pure speculation.
Yeah, it's just going to be it. My assumption is it's a taxi rank system. And that's okay. But so I can't specifically talk about broad experiences, but I do judge for the Australian Writers Guild. And I judge in specific categories that I've been previously nominated for or won. Right. So you're going to get, for example, writers who've written science fiction judging science fiction. Undoubtedly, there's still going to be a subjective bias. So if you're picking like quirky science fiction, which has kind of been where the Writers Guild's going, then
you won't get someone who hates science fiction.
Yeah, or sit there and be turned off by the portrayal of violence. It's like I feel like I need to put a trigger warning on that script because I know it's not going to be for everyone, but particularly science fiction is a broad category in a way that, say, horror isn't. But you've got to work out on a writing craft level in what you can control. Thinking about space pirates is given that is a genre, it's a mixed genre that isn't flagged early as being mixed genre. That marketing...
Somewhat deliberately, but yeah. The film would be marketed as a space pirates film. The problem is people going in reading it cold without being pitched to will go, oh, this is a hard sci-fi. And then it is not.
Yeah, which is why I'm a big believer of having title. Have we talked about this on an episode?
No, but I think we mooted once having an episode about...
pitch documents.
Well, that one. I think that would be a good one to do. But also like title cards or newsreel introductions and...
Oh, no, I'm not talking that. But that is something that is worth talking about. Because specifically for the Blacklist with the payload script, when we talked about it last time, it didn't have the super. I added the super in setting the world, specifically back in for the Blacklist, based on your experiences. Even though amazing friend of the podcast writer, Catherine McMullen, was like, no, you should get rid of the title sequence. It'd be so much better without it. And the problem is, it's like, Catherine, you're clearly like one of the smartest super story people not just that I know, but clearly in Australia and now potentially in LA, that, of course you're going to be following what's going on. Whereas for a lot of other people that aren't at her, literally just a literacy level. Yeah. And I'm not trying to be snobby about it and not.
But genre literacy, let's say.
Yeah. But coming back, like there are ways that I've been thinking about first pages. So Chas and I are writing a horror film called Red River Fever, right?
Ooh, we've thrown the title out there.
I mean, that's its current working title, but I'm also working on a crime story. That's Matt and I's follow-up. But there's a few other projects, and we actually paid a graphic designer to do a title treatment to use on the front page. And in fact, I would consider putting art or something else on the front page, just so the first thing they look at gives people an indication of tone. And I know people are like, oh, it should be bland because you shouldn't know anything going in, but that's bullshit because no one goes into anything not knowing what it is.
Or not without preconceived ideas, yeah.
Like you need a way to frame it. And I think there is things that we can do as writers to help people frame putting things into control, control. It's weird. I'm saying it now. Trigger warnings on the front page of a script is not a bad idea.
Yeah, potentially not.
Like imagine if the Blacklist
or let's say a subtitle. An ultra-violent sci-fi or something like that,
Yeah, I mean, we tend to, I think for a while, the payload tagline was you can't save everyone. But that's like a thematic, I always try to put the theme up front.
Let me just be clear here. We're not advocating this for industry. We're advocating this if you've got a project going to a gatekeeper. to further access, right? Because it's different. Writing for something that you're chucking up on the blacklist, you've already said you've written it differently than if you were sending a project to a producer who you knew the producer was going to read it, who was interested in this genre, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, they get concept art, and they might even get, depending on how generous I'm feeling, they'll get a story world document.
Yeah. So I'm writing a project for a producer at the moment. It's a horror film. I sent it to a few trusted readers, yourself included. You didn't read it, but one of them was Julio.
I read the first page. That was enough.
He turned his notes around in a day or so. If any of our listeners are out there, Julio does paid notes. He's been a reader for Austin Film Festival. He has read probably thousands of scripts.
I've used him for stuff, and all his notes were great.
He's really great reader. But he was saying to me, Chas, you're treating me like an idiot. Stop holding my hand. I don't need it. I'm like, you don't need it. But I've had plenty of experience of people not getting what I think is really basic tenets of a script because I didn't hold their hand enough.
Yes.
Because I didn't put the title card in there, or the subheading, or the fucking trigger warning that we're talking about.
The trigger warning, I specifically, is just in my particular thing. But, you know, like, imagine if it was like all those dickheads that with like sexual violence against women having, of which I've got a project that we're dealing with the fact that most violence perpetrated against women is by men. And it's like that, unfortunately, is the reality.
But interestingly, if you had at the beginning a title card with 3 stats, 97% of violent crimes committed against women are by men, is one of those stats. Then suddenly, those 3 stats at the beginning of a title card of a script gives you a whole lot of leeway about what you're going to talk about.
And the largest victims of, in fact, the largest group of victims of violence, of male violence, is actually other men. Yeah, I mean, it would be. And then there's that and I mean, that's not
But
bad,
what we're talking about, what we're kind of boiling down to here in terms of a craft tool, is setting up the read.
Yeah.
How much can you just in your script, without being able to pitch or being able to send concept art out, how much just from your screenplay are you able to set up your read so that your reader is open to the experience that they're about to go in if they're going in cold?
Oh, I can't remember the name of the film. The Fall, maybe? Pete Bridges' scripts that literally put him on the blacklist. I think he included a map on the second page.
Okay.
And because it's specifically meant to be quote unquote one shot. And it's like an alien invasion film about a couple trying to get back home or whatever, but he included a map. Great. No one's going to complain about geography because geography is far easier to communicate on script visually than it is in terms of writing. So yeah, I mean, I think they're probably, look, and I've never had a producer complain that I've sent them concept art or I've sent them like the front page has got a piece of artwork on it. Like I occasionally get paid to do ripomatics, pitch reels.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mood reels. Really?
Yeah, I would pay you to do mine.
Yeah, you can pay me to do a mood reel. No problem. Draft Zero listeners, you can pay me proper rates to do. Takes me about 2 days, depending on how much material you've got. But I can't name names, but basically I did a mood reel for a producer. They had what they thought was just a general meeting with one of the big streamers and essentially came in and just like gave a brief overview. And they're like, cool, what else do you have any other material? And then she played the mood reel and they're like, great, we love it. And it's going into production, right?
Or because of you, Stu.
It was clearly my amazing mood reel. But it was a good reel. Okay, so this is weird things, given that I don't really talk about my lecturing. But the main thing, because my students have to pitch what they're going to make for their major work, which is quote unquote motion design, which I'm interested in because it's like non-narrative filmmaking. It's reminding people that filmmaking doesn't have to be connected to narrative. Story is a tool of filmmaking, not
the other way around.
Not the other way around. When they have to kind of explain it, and I'm like, this is your opportunity. The pitch is the pitch. You have to learn in your career, learn how to pitch your work. And I will treat your material as if it's a pitch. Like handing me a scrap of fucking paper is useless. Like communicate the idea through how you communicate. And you look at the Stranger Things Bible, which you should Google or put a link. It looks like it's Stephen King meets Spielberg. You can tell the tone of the show. And there are ways that you can take some of those ideas and roll them in to your story. Outside, I'm talking visual clues, but you're talking about like with title cards, you're talking narrative tools. But they're both ways of framing the read.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of Fargo, going back to like Fargo, based on a true, isn't it like based on?
They completely made it up.
And they completely made it up, but someone died trying to find that money.
Yeah.
True story. That part, the person dying, true story.
So this kind of links, but kind of doesn't link, because it's about a pitch, right? So we've talked a bit about pitching materials without script and framing the read. And I've now had the experience of, I use treatments as a development tool. Okay. For me, they are a step between having an idea and getting to a screenplay. But for a while now, because I, like you, am wanting to test my ideas, I've actually been sending my treatments out. Now, when I send my treatments out, I'm like, is this idea worth pursuing? I'm not expecting the treatment to be the sell, except on 2 occasions recently, the project that you and I are working together, we worked on a treatment together that you've pitched, and also the development funding we went for, that I mentioned earlier, for the biopic, went to Screen Australia. That was for treatment to draft funding. So what they were assessing was a treatment. And one of the frustrating pieces of feedback I got through the producer from the funding agency was, you know, the treatment is missing those big cinematic, quiet moments. I'm like, they'll be in the screenplay, but they're not going to be in the treatment. And there's this kind of frustration, and I'll invite you to talk about it later because you've spoken about it. But a treatment is a weird document. To me, a treatment is anything, like if you've got 3, maybe 4 pages you can get away with, that's still, to me, like a synopsis, not a treatment. And a treatment is somewhere from 5 pages up, you've written out a prose version of a story that you are intending to tell cinematically. And the shitty thing about treatments for me is they're great development tools because they force you to dramatize the entire story. Because
this is not a lot. I'm rolling my eyes right now because I actually disagree.
Okay,
about
good.
The dramatization aspect.
All right.
I think that's their biggest flaw.
Okay, good. We'll come back to that. But the really shitty thing is when someone reads a treatment, it gives them just enough detail that they end up wanting more. It's this kind of, as a pitching tool, I find them deeply frustrating because people read them and then expect the reading experience, the emotional experience that they would get from reading a screenplay. Because there's enough detail in there that they go, ooh, what happens at this point? What does that feel like? You know, what's this scene like between these 2 people, which you've described in a fucking sentence because it's a 12-page distillation. So part of the frustration of the feedback and not getting that funding was all the feedback was not actually problems with the treatment. It was everything they identified is that will be in the script.
It's what, as an editor, we'll put a link into the show notes that you should play an audio clip, which is Can't Watch a Rough Cut Lady.
You approach each rough cut viewing with the fresh eyes of a 6-year-old child with ADD.
Why is the time code on there?
Even though you've been fully briefed, you still won't hesitate to throw in precious insight like, we need VO, and we could use some music here.
It's only a rough cut.
No detail is too small. No soundbite is too long. No duh, we need graphics.
Gee, I hadn't thought of that.
So grab another Clio Award, oh mistress of the misinformed, because when it comes to giving obvious feedback, your comment basket is full to bustin'.
Miss, I don't know how to view a rough cut lady.
They're called rough cuts for a lot of reasons. And the truth is, most people, unless they're editors, don't even know what a real rough cut is. Because a lot of the time, they're sanitized. Oh yeah, look, no, it's fine. I'm just going to pop in and play me the rough cut. And you're like, oh, we haven't prepped it. Because what you do is actually clean up audio levels, smooth out like land music, smooth out the cuts. Like what a lot of people think are rough cuts aren't rough cuts. That the ability to assess a work in progress is a skill in and of itself.
Do you want to tell what a rough cut
It's just
is?
a work in progress cut. Like
Yeah, but it's not even, to me, a rough cut is the first cut past first assembly.
the rough cut is where most of the time that a edit is going to stay, right? And so you're going to keep the edit in a form that makes it the most malleable, right? You're trying on ideas, but you're not going to concentrate on details because in many ways, this is how I approach it, because there's no point spending 15 minutes or whatever it is. I'm just making up a number. You're not going to spend 7 minutes and 22 seconds cleaning up a cut point between 2 shots if you don't even know if that shot's going to be in there, right? So it's about getting a feel for whether the whole thing that's going to work. And in my many years of being an editor, like we're talking professionally over 15 years and doing it for nearly fucking half of my life now, you develop a sense of being able to assess whether something's going to work without seeing it finished, right? You can get a feel for, oh yeah, cool. So when I can look at other people's edits, you're like, that's great. I don't think we're going to need that shot or whatever. Vice versa when you're looking at your own work. And even, man, I worked with a 20-year-old recently. He had a great fucking eye. His notes were awesome. Right, and he's obviously just grown up around stuff and he just had a real good sense, but he didn't need to see stuff that was finished. Fact is, most people don't know whether something is good or what is working unless it is finished. That what might be bumping them, I'm giving you the context of an edit, what may make them go, oh, I don't like that close-up is the choice of music. But all they know is they don't like that.
Or they don't like it because it's in a two-shot because you haven't broken it down into
coverage, whatever. They don't know what they're looking at, the rhythm, something's too slow, and they don't have the understanding of what is going on to accurately assess what of the component pieces is contributing to what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And what needs to be addressed. And I think the same is true of treatments.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's development people out there that have spent a lot of time reading treatments, possibly more time than you and I reading treatments and connected. But the fact is, a lot of people don't spend as much time thinking about what a script looks like or reading scripts on that as development documents, not finished.
Or if they're not
scripts.
writers, they don't know what the treatment has fixed or not fixed in terms of what's going to script.
Yes.
Potentially.
I think, related that to, I think treatments are documents of intent. That's what I mean. They're not great at dramatization, but they're good at communicating what you intend to do with the scene.
I think you and I are going to battle this out. And maybe it's because you and I have different ideas of what goes into a treatment or not. Because your idea of what a scene breakdown is stuff that I expect of myself in a treatment.
Okay. Maybe that's why your treatments aren't very good, Chas.
Motherfucker.
As in, I don't think, like, scene breakdowns are pretty dry documents, as they should be, right? And there is definitely an element of them that you can see that they're for me, an extended C breakdown. There is a version of where you can take that document and reverse engineer it into a treatment. Prose form, no dialogue, largely focused on action. The reason I like doing it under scene headings, etc., is it forces you to think of it as atomic units of
Production?
scenes. Yeah, like how is this actually going to be a scene in there, and forces you to think a little bit more in terms of the physicality of what the actors, like the actors are doing.
So the reason why I say that is why they're similar to me is in most of my treatments, a scene will be at least a paragraph, if not more. So it's rare for me to have a scene that's only like a sentence, or multiple scenes are in a sentence.
Or multiple scenes within a paragraph.
Potentially, but then I'll like highlight that it's a montage or a sequence or something like that.
I haven't read the treatment in particular that you're talking about. It could be that your treatments are approaching what I would call a scene breakdown. That's fine. It's just terminology, right? Point is that in my experience, I think the best form in terms of a treatment, quote unquote, a treatment as a selling document is around 4 pages. I don't know why that seems to be the magic number, but it seems to be the magic number. One page is too short. Anything longer and it starts to feel...
Well, people start expecting more. Yeah.
They want to feel more for their reading investment.
Yeah. They're reading enough detail, but not quite enough. It's making them, want more. I don't know how to put it any other way, but...
They feel what they're missing, not
what they're getting. That is the best way of putting it. And that's why I'm quite frustrated when we have to use treatments as a selling document. But what did we... Red River Fever, that was...
4 pages.
Oh, was it? We got it down to 4... I say we. Did you get it down to 4 pages? I feel like I wrote more.
Or it could be like 4.5. I think we had a version of it that was like 1 or 2 pages. But say the project that Matthew and I are working on, the 1.5 page treatment wasn't... synopsis was not doing any favors, and now it's sitting at like 2.5 and 3. It's enough where I feel like, as a document, that I'm like, oh, we need to make sure that the document is implying that we're going to spend as much time with that character as we actually know we're going to be spending in the film, even though plot-wise, in terms of recreating that story, the character isn't actually doing much in terms of shit, like driving events. Because that's always the dilemma. You know, I often will talk about events.
Yeah.
You know, the events are the same, just kind of related to the plot. But there is definitely a lot of quiet time where you can spend time with characters that is easy to overlook in a treatment because people are going to be like, Chas contemplates the meaning of the universe. Sounds really boring and sounds really flowery, but when it's executed on screen in the context of the larger structure and the movements of the story is actually going to feel deeply resonant, you know? But like 3 or 4 pages is enough to kind of lean in and allude to what character choices are and their key decisions and why the dilemmas they're facing without burdening I think that's what it is now, actually. 4 pages feels like you can get into what decisions characters are making as a consequence.
It's interesting because you're like, the perfect treatment is 4 pages where I'm
not
like,
saying it's perfect.
okay.
As a
selling document. Whereas I'm like, anything under 4 pages isn't even a treatment in my mind, because I use my treatment in the same way that I think you use scene breakdowns. As I write out a prose version of the film and I write it, they're generally 10 to 20 pages. I use them that whenever I'm writing a script and I feel lost, I go to that and go, that's what happens next. That's the next scene. And that connects to this. I have mentally run my way through the film and hopefully dramatized every moment. In the play that happens when you're writing the screenplay is within scenes, not like, what are the scenes?
Not the chain of cause and effect.
Yeah. Whereas I think if you're talking about a 4-page document, there is still that chain of cause effect, but it's much broader strokes. It's much more macro structure than...
Yeah, it's probably a couple of 1 or 2 key pivotal scenes, probably all your turning points are well represented, and then you're kind of alluding to what the connective tissue is. Yeah, I don't disagree. I had a similar problem when we got funded to do a scene breakdown of pretty much an entire season of a show, which is ridiculous. Enjoyed doing it, but ridiculous to do a scene breakdown for every episode. But essentially the reason that Matt and I decided to write the first 2 episodes is we're like, the scene breakdown is in and of itself valueless. That we've gotten nothing out of this.
It's not a good selling document.
No.
It was a great development document.
Yes.
But a development document is only useful when you've sold the end product.
Yeah, I mean, the producer was definitely sending people the screen breakdown and they were getting excited by it.
Okay.
Because it was a pretty good read. But obviously scene breakdowns are pretty dry.
So that's the difference between a selling document and a development
document for writers.
Yep. So tell me what you think a scene breakdown is. How is that different from the 2 different treatments that we're talking about?
Oh, look, your scene breakdown could be... So I've just got my own terminology from it, and I've read scene breakdowns from friends of mine that work on shows. Essentially, the scene breakdown is what a writer on a television show hands into the showrunner before getting permission. It's like the first step. But it also, because television being the nature of what it is, it starts giving them information, production information, cast, locations, etc., etc. And they've given a lot of rein, depending on the writer, of how much detail they include in that scene breakdown. Because it's like, look, if you can communicate to the showrunner in a 5-page scene breakdown what you're going to do and they're happy with that, great. If you need 15 pages to do it, do that. It's whatever it is to get your vision for the episode over the line, because this is my understanding, and people can correct my knowledge of it. It's not unheard of that you hand in your scene breakdown and then you don't get to write the episode because people are not happy with you. This is different from the American system or the traditional American system where the room often writes scripts together and they just carve out the credit based on seniority and all that weird hierarchy shit. But often they'll be like, Chas wrote the scene on this episode and I wrote the scene on that episode and someone else wrote these scenes, and it's all kind of pushed together and ironed over by the showrunner. That's my understanding, where in Australia it's a little bit more like you're a gun for hire for a particular episode after the writer's room. So for me, the scene breakdown, I like think of it as discrete atomic units of action, because it makes me think about, where does this thing come from? It lets me solve a whole bunch of problems. And we had an issue, I was talking to you about a specific scene where I'm like, I've come to this point where I think we need to roll back because there's 2 logical things don't make sense.
And you fixed the second problem, but we still had a problem with the first beat that we hadn't identified in the 4-page selling document and
or
in our outline.
In our like bullet point outline. Absolutely. And it's the kind of thing that we're solving it now, which when it comes time to write the script. And yeah, the script should be relatively fast to write, because half of what we're doing, probably half, could end up just literally being in the script. The psychological advantage of doing a scene breakdown is the document that we're writing is for nobody else but us. So the dialogue is scratch. We're probably going to sit there and type a dialogue. The description is scratch. You might come up with a nice turn of phrase, great, and it stays. But there is no pressure to write a really nice line or a really nice transition.
Which is what I like about treatments as development documents as opposed to selling documents. Because suddenly, with treatments as a selling document, you are investing so much time into the execution of the language to then sell another document whose job it is to sell
the feature.
Yeah, production.
Look, it sounds like you use treatments. So I like use scene breakdowns. Part of the reason that we've adopted scene breakdowns is because I will tend to work with co-writers. So the scene breakdown is what we end up agreeing on, and then we carve it up.
And I'm deferring to you on this project to do the scene breakdown. I don't feel that it's necessary for me. I would rather do the exploring that we're doing in scene breakdown and the problem solving that we're doing in scene breakdown in pages if I was working by myself. But because I'm not working by myself, I feel like this is a much better way of doing it, because you fix those problems together before you've gone to pages rather than bouncing back and forth. So I'm deferring to you on this.
I can't see how these problems that we're solving now. Point is, you solve at, and this comes back to my rough cut analogy, you solve the problems at the stage of you want to solve the problems with the minimal amount of effort needed, if you know what I mean. Right, does that make sense? Like,
it does, but there are some people's processes aren't like that. Some people's processes are, I need to write the script 90 times.
Yeah, that's great if they've got time to write it 90 times, right?
Yeah.
I'm coming back to my experience, like, it's like Pixar animating to full, complete, finished, high-quality rendering and going, that's just our process. It's like, well, that could be your process. It's just really inefficient. That's why they use storyboards and story reels. And occasionally they will go into production and we'll do the classic Toy Story 1 thing of shutting everything down and reanimating it. Sometimes that's the only point that you know. And that's okay.
I just don't want to take away from our listeners potentially they process things differently, because I mean, Robert Cargill in the Ride Along podcast, he had an episode where he was talking about there's pantsers and there's planners. And I think you and I are more planners. We're not like the people who just sit down and figure shit out in the writing of it and in the execution of it.
I disagree with that. What we are doing is fucking writing. Yeah. Sitting down and doing a scene breakdown is fucking writing.
I'm not saying I never said it wasn't writing.
I know, no. But I'm just like those people that kind of like arrogantly go, I'm just writing the script and I'm a pantser and you're just planning it. I'm like, dude, I'm still writing and I'm still figuring it out.
Okay, so, and he made the observation, I really liked the episode, he made the observation that pantsers will have to rewrite more, whereas planners spend more time planning and less time rewriting.
Yeah, it's just about energy efficiency and coming back to how you can control.
And the big difference is when you're in a co-writing relationship, that you have to think about the efficiency of
co-writing relationship that's also, in the case of Matt and I, geographically challenged as well as time challenged. And in my case, we are not available at the same time. Whereas if we were sitting in the room every single day at the same time, passing the keyboard back and forth, you could probably pants it. It could become like an exquisite corpse, which is that part, the parlor game where you draw and you fold it over and then draw. That's a exquisite corpse. Exquisite corpse. And you can do that. I'm just doing what works for me. I think there's still plenty of opportunity for creative ideas. I think that I just react to that idea of like, oh, I have pants and it's just because I'm more creative. It's like, hey, if it works for you, that is great.
Oh, so the reason why I'm reacting to it is I think you and I are pretty close in what we need to do to write. Part of it may be a control thing, like you said, like maybe I'm a control freak, but there's a lot of the stuff that we're figuring out at scene breakdown phase that I would personally, if I was writing this myself, would prefer to figure out in pages. And that means I would have to write more pages and rewrite more pages to figure out those problems.
So why do you prefer it?
I think that
gives you a full sense of productivity.
I don't feel that's true. I feel I enjoy the writing of it more. So it's about the stuff that we're doing in the scene breakdown, it's less fun for me, so it's harder to do.
You have it. The thing is, you're just I think you're having a false impression of it because you're literally tailing me, cleaning stuff
At the
up.
moment. But I led the treatment stuff and I hate that fucking...
Yeah, which is why I gave it to you. Depends what you enjoy. I like solving the scene, right? There are things that I write and it's just like, this doesn't feel like a scene, which is this, and hopefully this year, 2020, will explore more concepts of scene writing, but I could just be like, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's a scene. But sometimes in the scene breakdown, like I did with the last thing I wrote today, I wrote dialogue. It's like 50%, like it's not great dialogue, but the only way I could solve the scene was by writing it. But I don't feel that other parts of the storytelling where I'm trying to solve it, I'll only do that when it's necessary, right? But it's like, this is better than what we had in the outline and the synopsis, and it wasn't what we had discussed in person when we were running effectively a mini writer's room, which is what you were doing more than time. Anytime there's more than one writer, right? And that's exciting to me. It's like, oh no, this is what he should be doing, because now, because we are still writing linearly from top to bottom, I'm in the head of this character and he's now emerging as more of like a Ripley figure, right? Like not the protagonist, not necessarily driving action except where needed, but being the voice of
the audience.
Yeah, like a ruthless the person who locks what's his face in the quarantine, right? Which is what I think of Ripley's defining character choice. But it's fine. Like I know that you seem to enjoy writing dialogue more than me. So the idea of exploring your characters through dialogue rather than through action.
And maybe that's it. And this is just where it comes down to process stuff, is that when I write dialogue, I'm not actually quote unquote writing dialogue. I'm sitting in my head and play acting the scene. And that's fun for me.
It's fun for me too. I just don't, that's not my default.
Yeah.
I'm very happy. I pat myself on the back anytime I can write a scene that works without anyone saying anything.
And it means that only afterwards, after having written the scene, going, oh shit, there's a turn missing, or there's not enough conflict here, or, there's stuff that we're solving at scene breakdown point would have been solved before you go to pages.
Quote unquote solving, because we don't know what we don't know. And that's coming back to why I like it as a method, is essentially, as I said, you're solving things at the stage that you can solve them. You're seeing them, the rough cut metaphor, which is why, and maybe it's because I'm an editor, no one talks about a pants editor. I'm just, every edit that I'm doing is a fine cut, because that just seems like a ridiculous waste of energy and time, right? Whereas the point of it is to keep it loose so you can look at it and go, oh yeah, that's feeling better, and you're refining it and you're chipping away, and then you might end up throwing it out. Like I have worked on stuff where you will do 4 cuts of a scene and all of them at fine cut stages, because that's what you need to diagnose what's going on, right? But there's other times you can sit there and you've got to keep it super loose because you're still dialing in a performance or whatever. You'll get to something where in a rough cut where you've got basically the shot order, the sequencing of the shots is put together, right? And then it's just the rhythm of it. But you can whittle it down, and then you're something like, that close-up no longer works. You think you've solved it, but you haven't. It's never finished, and, well, no, nothing is ever finished. It's only abandoned. That's life, right?
So, out of that, the only last topic we have to cover is writing for yourself versus work for hire. Now, you've got more experience at this than I have in terms of writing for other people.
Yeah.
But I've only just written my first feature screenplay for someone else.
But I haven't done from their concept, but me writing the first draft. I've done rewrites.
Okay, yeah. So this was a producer gave me a pitch. I wrote a treatment, they approved the treatment, and now I'm writing the first draft. And in order for me to be excited about writing it, I wrote it. I realize now, and it's the first time I've done this, but I realized I was writing it as a spec. And I didn't realize that was different in a weird kind of way. I finished the first draft and I sent it out to readers, and I was putting trigger warnings on these scripts that I was sending out to readers saying, I'm fucking around a lot with form here, because of what I would want to do if I was writing this as a spec. And it was only after I sent it out, I'm like, fuck, I'm going to have to remove all these flourishes and writerly execution things that I put in there that would be really good in a spec script because they're selling me as a writer, because it's not being written for production. It's not being written to be sent to a production company or being, heavens forbid, sent to a director or an actor. You know, we always come back to the idea of writing for the read as opposed to writing for production. And I realized that I'd written this one for the read when it was actually going to go out to people who are reading it for production. And it was just a strange thing to come across that idea that I'd never, because it was the first time I was writing for someone else. I was like, shit, I have to write differently because I'm writing for someone else and not just writing to sell me. Because I'm not writing to sell me, I'm writing to sell the idea. Someone has hired me to sell the idea.
Contrary to your belief, the world is not about you, Chas.
Contrary to everyone's belief. So have you come across having to write in a different way when you've been hired to write?
Yeah, I think I'm on some level always conscious of production. Just my default. We talked about that in the Unfilmables episode, where essentially I was having to kind of not reverse engineer, but like add in more Unfilmables. So a drier writing style is kind of where I come from.
Did you read that amazing Twitter thread? I think I posted it from the Draft Zero, but it was a writer, but clearly had such a good sense of editorial. He wrote out in Twitter 3 different ways of describing someone doing the dishes. And because of just the syntax and the punctuation, it implies shot order.
So, Chas here, just interrupting briefly. You know that Twitter thread we were just talking about? Well, it was written by screenwriter and script consultant Dave Wappel. And we reached out to Dave on Twitter and he very kindly recorded his Twitter thread and we will now play it for you. If you would like to reach out and contact David, you can find him on Twitter or at his website. We'll have links to both in the show notes.
Hi, I'm David Wappel. I've been screenwriting for 5 years now, living in Los Angeles for the past 3. I also read for management and production companies, and one of the things I noticed coming up in my notes and calls were action lines. Not necessarily what was happening in the story, but the way the lines themselves were written. And so I put together a little memo, and then I turned that memo into a thread on Twitter, which I've been invited to read here, with only a few minor edits from the original. I think action lines are aimed to accomplish 2 things: describe what is happening and describe how we see what is happening. A lot of the scripts I read from aspiring writers often focus on what is happening and not on how we see it. More experienced writers focus on both. The best writers do both, but hide the second so that you don't even realize it's happening. Okay, now I want to talk about these things that I call anchoring nouns. It is the noun that anchors the reader to how they should be picturing what is unfolding. While remembering that I totally made up this nomenclature, an anchoring noun can be defined as the first noun you encounter which provides context for the size of the action you're being asked to hold in your brain. From my experience, the human brain doesn't do anything more than it needs to. It's super lazy or super efficient depending on how you want to look at it. So if I say picture an apple, you're only going to picture an apple. You're likely not going to picture an apple hanging from a branch of an apple tree or in the mouth of a pig at a luau. You're probably just going to picture the apple. And that apple picture is of a certain size, just big enough for the apple. This is where you can ask, what camera shot contains this noun? Is it really, really far away? Probably not. Are you so close you can only see a part of it? Also probably not. It's probably just big enough to see the apple. Might be what's considered a close-up. So without mentioning a camera at all, your brain is actually creating a shot size. Okay, now at this point, some of you may be thinking, but you're not describing any action. You're just describing things. That's not screenwriting. You're right. So let's put this notion into practice. Examine the following. Stu reaches into his back pocket. His hand slips into his back pocket. Both describe the same action, but you'll likely see them differently. In the first, Stu is the anchoring noun. You may picture anywhere from a medium wide to a medium close-up, but generally, you're probably picturing a person. In the second example, hand is the anchoring noun. Most likely, you're picturing a close-up of a hand slipping into a back pocket. Now, neither one is inherently better than the other, but understanding how we interpret words into images can help you make choices that have different dramatic effects. All right, so that's anchoring nouns, and now let's talk about word order. Word order can help suggest camera moves, edits, tone, you name it. In my writing, first and foremost, I try to use an anchoring noun to orient the reader to the shot they're looking at. Then, I try to move through the action using word order, grammar, sentence structure, punctuation, to suggest camera moves and edits. Below are 5 different ways to write the same action. Each have the slugline interior kitchen. How do you interpret the cam moves and edits, if any, in each example below? Chas scrubs dishes in an empty kitchen. In an empty kitchen, Chas stands alone at the sink, scrubbing dishes. A sponge swirls on a dirty plate. Chas scrubs away over the sink, alone in an empty kitchen. As he washes the plates, Chas sighs, alone over the kitchen sink, the table behind him covered with 10 more dirty plates. Scrub, scrub. Chas's eyes look up and out the window. A sigh. He returns to his scrubbing. Now look at the difference between that first example and the last. In the first, the action of scrubbing the dishes seemed to be an important thing to notice. But in the last, the focus is on his emotional reaction. I don't mention dishes. Yes, the other examples primed you for dishwashing. I may have gotten a freebie there. Depending on context, I may or may not be able to do it in the script. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Is this news to you?
No, I always knew it was possible, but I don't think I'd seen it.
So clearly articulated
Yeah.
in terms of, because what I think he was specifically good about his example, it wasn't just shot order, what was the emotional resonance of the specifics of how that was unfolding. So it wasn't just like, oh, do we start on the guy and then reveal he's washing up dishes, or do we start on the dishes? It's like, these all have
Different effects.
different emotional effects. Yeah,
And
that's great.
when you were developing the script that I was writing, there were sometimes lines and you were like, I know this is really pedantic, but I want you to swap the order of the object and the subject in this sentence, because that is going to have a different emotional
Okay, well, I was
effect.
doing that, was I?
We weren't talking about it in that way. You were just like, start with this part of the sentence and then move on to that part.
I have a specific, we've talked about it before. I used to call it hyper present. I have a specific thing to do with the way that, and I'm looser on it than I used to be, but largely sentences that are constructed in a specific way that would be visually difficult to present. So with great violence, Stu pushes Chas in the room, for example. That doesn't, when you actually think about visually what you're seeing, that doesn't actually unfold linearly, right? And the thing is, it's a kind of harder sentence to pass because you've got to read the whole sentence to kind of reconstruct it. Whereas, Stu pushes Chas with great violence into the room. Like, that is something that is visually representable, more easily translatable on screen.
Because it's more linear in terms of the action.
Because, you can see it. And it could be like, oh, well, actually, but it could be because we're going to open up on the hands shoving Chas. And it's like, well, then describe that. That's kind of my general attitude to how language should be on the page. How does that translate to your work for hire thing? I don't know. You've got a very specific experience that's different from mine, so I can't really comment.
Sure. I think what I realized about myself is I like the sound of my own written voice.
Yeah.
I like my turns of phrase. I like my little flourishes.
One day from having your hair being clean, one wash from your hair being clean.
Yeah, I like all of that. And it was just interesting that I think those can do things and have their time and their place. I'm not saying get rid of them. It's just writing for someone else. I'm suddenly in service of the project and not in service of myself. And look, frankly, for all my projects, I should be in service of the project and not in service of myself. But where I'm at career-wise, I'm writing in a kind of mercenary fashion. I know that the project isn't going to get made, but I just want someone to read it and go, oh, that's a good writer. I want to hire him for something else. So maybe I am trying, or have been trying, to draw attention to myself as a writer.
Yeah. So, and I'm neither agreeing with you or disagreeing with you. I think, though, to make the observation we made from an Unfilmed Rules, it's like, who are you writing for the reader or for the, who is the audience? And there's a big difference between I want to impress someone at a competition and I need someone to understand how this is going to work on screen.
And I think the really scary thing for me was actually thinking with this project, shit, this is going to have to go out to directors and they're not going to want to say, fuck you, man, I know how to shoot a scene. Like, I don't agree with that idea that writers should never direct from the page, but I was over directing from the page.
Yeah, and I'm not going to disagree with that. I mean, not that this thing got made, but there was a horror film that we did a rewrite on, and it's basically an action sequence, a rumble, brawl in the back of a car. And we wrote, like, in capital letters, we see this inside, one shot inside of the car, never see outside the windows or whatever it is. Partly to solve a production issue, which is eventually this car ends up in a car crash. But I had no problem writing in that, even though it was effectively a camera direction, because a director might just end up crossing it out and go, fuck you, I know how to do this. But what actually gives them is context for how to read this particularly super intimate fight sequence, which is like two people like scramble battle in the back of a vehicle.
I think Julio would say, Stu, trust me, Chas wrote way too much. Camera directions.
That's fine. It was a first draft. You can cut all that stuff out.
And I have in the subsequent draft.
Or just a pass. I mean, that just feels like a pass.
Yeah, it was.
But you need to
I
write
did it in a day. Yeah.
You need to write it for you to help you. You're putting, it's the scaffolding, right? Like you're putting up the scaffolding to help build your building, and then you start pulling that stuff away, and then see your home go, is it falling? It's like Jenga. Is it going to fall down? Is it going to fall down? Cool. We got the right amount. So that it feels like, making sure that you keep in the back of your mind that you are writing for a director. Yeah. Like there is specifically, and it being a more specific thing. But coming back to your observation about writing for yourself makes me think of, this is a problem doing student films or music videos. And I hate to generalize for the DPs out there that listen to us, but it's often a problem with DPs or production designers where they make decisions about what's going to make them look good on their reel rather than what is good for the project. And so they may end up spending way too much time fucking a shot. Like literally like pixel fucking the lighting or whatever because they want to get a really great close-up rather than going, in the service of the whole film, we need to let this go and move on or whatever. And that's a hard thing, but generally I want to collaborate with people who work for the film, not for themselves.
And I've got an actor example of this. It was Eli Roth talking about shooting Cabin Fever, and it's in a podcast, and you'll have to find Eli Roth podcast because I can't remember which one it is. He's got his own podcast, several of them, but he was being interviewed and he was talking about there was an actor in Cabin Fever who would always fuck up the 2 or 3 shots, and he realized that that actor was deliberately fucking up the 2 or the 3 shots, so he would have to get a close-up where he would then suddenly nail it. So he would always, in the end, the actor was savvy enough to know that in the end edit of the film, he would always get close-ups. But he was fucking the film to benefit his own career or presentation. So, I don't have that much more to talk about. Do you, Stu?
No, I think there's probably some Backmatter, like functional stuff to do with like the Patreon.
Well, okay, so what I was going to say is if this episode sounds different, it's because we are in person in the same room for once, and we are trialing our lapel mics ahead of a future recording with Stephen Cleary and hopefully with other guests. This will facilitate it. Paid for by our amazing Patreons who are bringing you more Draft Zero more often. If it feels like the 9 episodes we released last year are insufficient, they would have been much less were it not for our Patreon. So if you too, dear listener, want more Draft Zero more often, please do give to Patreon. And if you do not have any money, please do what some amazing listeners like Ralph Walker do, which is just pimp us constantly on Twitter.
Thanks, Ralph.
Yep. Give us a
review on iTunes.
Apple Podcasts now.
On Apple Podcasts. Or Stitcher. Or promote us on forums, whether it's the Facebook Screenwriters group or
/R Screenwriting.
/R Screenwriting. We do love Red Edit, but it's actually... People unsurprisingly trust someone else recommending a podcast than us self-promoting. Yeah. So that's good. But also Patreon is paying for a few different things. So one thing we've only just started doing was these episode guides and recaps. So our Drafts Zero intern, one of them. Sounds so cool. Alex, she has been putting together these like 20-page summaries of episodes which go out on our Patreon. That you can, if you go to Patreon, you'll be able to find them there. And also these kind of shorter, like 2-page recaps that go to Reddit and Medium and all, but that's all done through, made possible because of our patrons.
So, I mean, hopefully as a preview for what's coming, we're finally going to do our Sofia Coppola episode. We are recording an episode on melodrama with Stephen Cleary. We are going to record an episode on the Return of Skywalker, the Rise of Skywalker. We're going to do an episode on the Snip, the Draft Zero production, as Ben would like to brand it.
Like to.
And we've got a whole lot of stuff that, as you said, we want to explore in terms of scene work, and I more want to explore
Character journeys. Which I think are... Actually, no, they're not really correlated. They're like different ends of the spectrum.
They're in opposite ends of the spectrum, but as Craig Mazin likes to say, all of this stuff is related.
It is, which coming back to the read, like that's what the reader thing is. If you like something, you're going to give it highest fucking scores because it works for you. If particularly if you can't if you don't understand what's going on, which I think we talked about in character motivation, you'll just be lost, and therefore whatever these characters are saying is nonsense. I mean, that's the key to good dialogue. As much as we did 2 episodes on dialogue, and that was hopefully really useful. It's like, if the story is working, then most of the time your dialogue is going to be good.
But if there's amazing dialogue and not a good narrative underneath it.
Which is what? Can you think of an example?
I think there's a lot of Tarantino wannabes who don't realize what a mastery of narrative he has. And it can make a good scene, but not necessarily a good movie or TV show.
So many thanks to our top level patrons: Christopher, Daniel, Jack, Jesse, Crob, Matteo, Nick, Sandra, and Theus?
Matteo.
Thank you so much for being top level patrons. If you would like your name butchered in a Draft Zero podcast, please consider becoming our top level patron, and specifically request that Stu's the one that has to read out the patrons.
I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-zero.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.